All right, hello everybody, and welcome to Geopolitical Trends, where truth matters. Excited to be with you once again. I know we had our community conversation earlier, but now we're gonna be having our monthly conversation with none other than Carl Zha. You all been waiting for Carl, so here is Carl. Hi, Carl.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good to see you, brother. Very, very excited because we got a lot to cover here, and like to pick your brain on a host of issues. So I'm gonna start, Carl. We're gonna get into it right away, guys, because there's a lot to cover. I want to start right away with the statements by the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, in Philippines regarding China. As of now, the thinking is they all, meaning all U.S. allies in Asia, will have now to sort of get together against China. Where do you what the heck with these statements?
Well, actually, what he said is nothing new. So he just reiterate what has been stated by the former Secretary of State Tony Blinken when he traveled to Philippines a year ago.
Oh,
They use even the same language, ironclad commitment. U.S. have ironclad commitment to the Philippines, including South China Sea. This has been it really shows kind of continuity of the U.S.
yeah,
foreign policy, at least in regard to China. There's nothing has changed.
yeah,
They're going to continue to use Philippines as a linchpin of the U.S. Strategy to antagonize China, to stir up tension in the region, and they're going to try to weaponize the South China Sea dispute to insert U.S. military forces. They already have access to the 9 Filipino bases and the U.S. Typhoon ballistic missiles, the medium range ballistic missiles, which they deployed to the Philippines last year, ostensibly as part of the joint exercise, one of the largest exercise between U.S. and Philippines aimed toward China. And that those Typhoon missiles never left. And U.S. last year said they're going to take the
yeah,
missiles off the Philippines. And the Filipino government at the end of the year said, you know what, we're thinking about purchasing them. So really, they're just gonna they're staying. Those Typhoon missiles are staying, and they can cover to like half of southern China. So that was their intended purpose, to serve as a threat to China.
yeah,
And as we talked many times before on this show, current Filipino President Bongbong Marcos is perfectly happy to go along with that, because U.S. have a lot of leverage on him, especially on his family fortune. His dad has stashed
yeah,
away something like more than $30 billion of ill-gotten gains, all the corrupt money stashed in the U.S. banks, and that has been frozen by the U.S. government. So if Bongbong Marcos ever want to see any of that, he has to do U.S. biddings. And this actually led to political crisis inside the Philippines. One of the biggest thing that happened was the open split between Bongbong Marcos and his one-time ally, the Duterte family. Duterte, they, when Bongbong Marcos ran for president, Duterte supported his bid because but
yeah,
back then, Bongbong Marcos was singing a different tune. He said he will continue Duterte's legacy of continuing independent foreign policy, and he even made a show of visiting China as his first trip abroad. But right after his visit to Washington and talking with Joe Biden, that everything got turned around 180. So this is why we're seeing the
yeah,
rest of Duterte by ICC. Duterte had a choice basically. When he was traveling to Hong Kong, he was warned if he came back to the Philippines, he will be arrested and extradited. But
yeah,
Duterte decided, you know what? That's what I'm not going to go into exile. Then it looks like I'm at fault. I'm running away. No, I'm going to come back. I'm going to force you to make good on your threat. Had me arrested. Now this is a huge political turmoil in the Philippines, because now you have thousands of Duterte's supporters taking on the street to protest the decision. And the Philippine government now is going after Duterte's daughter, the vice president, trying to get her impeached. So this is a huge political crisis brewing in the Philippines. Between the political faction that wants to
yeah,
preserve Duterte's legacy and and but the faction represented by Bongbong Marcos, who wish to be the client state for the United States. And this is all brought, by the way, brought on by the U.S. pressure. U.S. wasn't involved in this. This would not have happened, and this is not good for the Philippines because when Duterte was in power, he invited a lot of the Chinese investment into his country. The Philippines has signed on many Belt and Road Initiative projects, but Bongbong Marcos recently he froze all the BRI project in the Philippines. So among the Southeast Asian countries, China was heavily invested in almost every Southeast Asian country except Philippines at this moment because the freeze put on by Bongbong Marcos. And of course, that's not good for the Filipino economy. Philippines has 100 million people. There's a lot of youth under employment. And going forward, they can't always just play a role to be like the service center for United States when U.S. is actually developing AI that's going to actually replace those jobs. Like one of the quote unquote AI companies in U.S. founded by Alexander Wang. He talks about his company, how his company is providing AI solutions to all the like the OpenAI or the US big AI company. And then look at his business model. His business model is literally a digital sweatshop. He goes to Philippines. He recruit people and paying them like below even the Filipino standard of wage. The people are getting paid like less than $1, less than $1, and they're all they do is they tag image and videos because AI is garbage in, garbage out. You have to provide AI with sort of information, and this is what they do. They go to the Philippines and they pay like less than minimum wage to have people sit there all day in front of video and images and tagging them to provide the information to feed back to the other AI services. So this was kind of the low level job that the Filipinos have been assigned to in kind of the US led rule-based international order. And this is also the reason US is not happy with China, because that was supposed to be China's role. When United States multinationals went to China in the 1990s, 2000s, they're in their imagination, China was supposed to stay this pool of vast, cheap labor that was supposed to produce low value but labor intensive goods for the U.S. multinationals. And but China actually climbed the technological ladder. So now they're producing EVs, they're producing their own AI tools, and this is why United States was not happy about it. J.D. Vance actually gave a speech recently talking about this. He actually said, globalization was a mistake because we thought we'll go to China, and then those developing countries will continue to work on low margin, labor intensive stuff while we focus on research, development, and high end manufacturing. But what happened is, in case of China, is now they're eating our lunch, right? So they're speaking out loud, very honestly, about what their intention is. They wanted the global South to be like this permanent underclass to serve, to power the U.S. empire. And that's right now, Philippines is playing that role, and that's where a lot of the U.S. business elite, national security elite, want to keep them there. And unfortunately, some Filipino elite, represented by the likes of Bongbong Marcos, are perfectly happy to play along because they get a cut, their own cut, their own pound of flesh on the process. So this is, whereas if you look at what China is doing in the region, China is investing in infrastructure. I said this many times. I'm in Bali. Here Huawei built the 5G and 4G networks here. China built a power plant in north of Bali that's providing much of the electricity on the island. And I am using a Xiaomi phone. Chinese phone manufacturer made smartphone affordable to many people in the global south. It's not just no longer just like iPhone, like a status symbol for a selected people. Because before only the rich in Indonesia could afford. Upper middle class, could afford to buy iPhone as a status symbol. But nowadays, Apple themselves are forced to cut price because of the Chinese competition. So it's good for the consumers, and this is what China provides. It provides alternative. It provides competition to kind of the U.S. monopoly of the high end products, high end manufacturing, and that's what they don't like. I mean, that this is the whole rationale for containment of China, which is why they're in the Philippines trying to stir up tension, trying to talk about so-called their U.S. and its allies going to contain China. That ship has sailed. Yeah, that ship has sailed. It's not. I mean, right now, really, Pete, he's just talking about Philippines, United States, and Japan. That's like 3 countries out of all these East Asian countries. Most of the Asian countries, they just want to do business. So they're perfectly happy of doing business with both U.S. and China and serve as a bridge. But this is not what the U.S. elite have in mind.
Mm-hmm. What I found it very interesting that you never hear anything the U.S. saying about North Korea, based on what they are developing using AI. I just read a white paper regarding this development of this particular aspect. So you don't hear the U.S. talking about North Korea because they know the North Korean is not going to bluff. I agree with you, Carl. I mean, the idea of it's absurd. And that shows you now how much the elites in Washington, they can't think straight. They just cannot think straight. When you consider the strength of China, but on the other hand, you look at how Philippines is allowing itself to be used as a proxy, because that's what's going to be. Philippines will be pushed over the cliff because the U.S. is not going to do what they want. This is my assessment, and I could be wrong, but the way I see it, and I've been arguing this, the U.S. wanted to ramp up the tensions between the Philippines and China. Okay? They're telling the Filipinos, just go ahead, challenge the Chinese in the South China Sea, even target their boats if you have to, whatever. We will defend you. We're not going to defend Philippines. I mean, you would think Filipinos will think of Ukraine as a case in point. But Bongmo, as you said, he has his own agenda. And the Filipino people is going to end up having to do something about this one. So I want to go back to 2 points you mentioned earlier quickly here. One about the infrastructure. And yes, you're absolutely correct when you consider what China is doing, for example, in Thailand with the high-speed train. So, and also the developments in the Singapore port. To my knowledge, the Chinese are involved in this one here. So, but here is the kicker, and I'm going to share a screen with you guys for you all to see. Let me just share it here, and I'll get your take on this quickly here, Carl, before we move on to other. What you're looking at about, which wasn't reported, the top U.S. executives, including Tim Cook, Stephen Schwarzman, Ken Griffin, and others looking to explore opportunities in China. This is what I found very, hypocritical, that the media is not saying anything about all this when we know you cannot move forward without having access to the Chinese.
Because it goes against the media narrative, right? They're trying to paint China as an enemy, and then they saw China opening doors to like Elon Musk, Tim Cook, and it doesn't make sense. But that China is not opposed to doing business with the West, with the U.S. China welcomes it. And whereas United States, what they do, they have Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, arrested, detained for a couple of years. This is a difference. This is the United States is closing its borders, both literally and metaphorically. And China remain open. It's remain open for business because, like I say, China's business is business. U.S. business is war, and right now U.S. is leveraging tariff against everyone. Canada, Mexico, and China. Now, Canada, Mexico, China, these are the three largest trading partners of the United States, and Trump is levying tariff against everyone and the Europeans
crazy.
too. And Trump just announced tariff against all the foreign cars, 25% on any cars that's not made in America, and 25% on any car parts that's not made in America, which means the new car prices in the United States is going to skyrocket because a lot of the Japanese, German, Korean car makers, even if they have factory in US, they still import a huge portion of their cars. Like Toyota, I believe 40% of the Toyotas sold in the United States is made elsewhere, outside of the US, and it's the figure is even higher for for Mercedes-Benz, for Volkswagen, Hyundai, Kia. So all these people are going to get hit. And even Tesla, because Tesla cars have components from China. So even Tesla is going to take a hit because now they're going to have to pay tariff on those Chinese components. And this is why Ford CEO Jim Farley was really against the tariff, because a lot of people don't know, a lot of the American cars nowadays are made with many Chinese components. Now they're going to have to pay tariff on those Chinese components. And that, of course, eventually that's going to, the price increase is going to pass down to the consumer. So what that really means is when this tariff takes effect, you're going to see a huge increase in new car prices. If you buy old car, used car, you might still be okay, but the new cars, you're gonna have to pay tariff, man. You the consumer is paying the tariff, not China, not Japan. China don't. This is actually, the auto tariff doesn't even affect China, because China don't even sell any consumer cars in the United States right now. So they're actually going to be okay. It's the Japanese, Korean, and Germans going to pay the price, and even American cars. But Elon Musk, Tesla will probably do fare the best, because Tesla in US, they have a more US-based supply chain. So even though they do have to pay some tariff on Chinese components, but compared to their competitors, they will have, they're less exposed. They're less exposed to their tariff. So what this means is, even if there will be modest increase of Tesla price, the Tesla, the price increase will not be, will be much smaller than the other car brands. So this is what the effect is. Trump is giving his buddy Elon Musk a huge gift. He's giving Tesla a huge gift by implementing this tariff. This is something I don't see anybody in mainstream media talking about this. This is essentially Trump is doing Elon Musk a huge favor. You know what? I'm gonna put tariff on all your competitors, so you're gonna sell more Tesla. That's what's gonna happen. And so, I mean, this is that's how things works in the United States. It's as I said many times, it's an oligarch. It's a government for the oligarchs. All oligarchs for the oligarchs by the oligarchs.
That's true.
I mean, that's how the U.S. government is designed. It's just, you just have a different rotation of a different set of oligarchs in power after the election. Currently, it's Elon Musk and all the Silicon Valley tech bros that are in charge right now. They're going to be the ones who benefit the most from the Trump policies.
That's right. And here is the interesting thing, Carl. All this comes on the heels of the recent report. How many vehicles, since we're talking about automobiles here, or automotives, the Chinese have produced about 11,200,000, somewhere around that figure, worldwide. When you combine some countries, they won't even come close to that production. So it highlights to you where things are headed. And you're absolutely correct. You're spot on that.
Yeah, I mean, even like the non-Chinese brand, they
Yeah,
produce in China. More than 50, like 54% of Tesla is produced in the Shanghai Gigafactory. So even the because China is the manufacturing center of the world right now. And
yeah,
what's really worrying for a lot of the people in the West is the Chinese brands themselves. Now instead of making product for the Western brands, where the Western multinational command most of the profit. Now, Chinese brand is gaining power. Like the transition to EVs. The newest, I think the last month, the vehicle sales report in China, more than half of the new vehicles sold in China was EV, was electric vehicles, and those are among those electric vehicles the legacy automakers, the Japanese, the Germans, the Americans, they don't even figure, it's mostly Chinese domestic brands that's making
yeah,
those EVs, and China is a world's largest automotive market. They sell twice as many cars in China as they do in United States. That's how big the Chinese car market is. So all these right now, all these like especially the Japanese and German ones, they're
yeah.
gonna get hit. They're getting hit by a double whammy. They're losing out in the world's largest auto market, which is China, to the
Hmm.
Chinese domestic
Hmm.
competition, and now they're gonna get hit by Trump tariff in United States. They're number two export market. So like I said, U.S. is now it's one of the main tasks of U.S. is cannibalizing its own allies. You realize you cannot compete with China, so let's go after the
Absolutely.
Japanese and Europeans. Let's cannibalizing their industry,
Yeah,
and there's nothing those so-called U.S. partners could do anything about it because they're militarily occupied countries. There's still U.S. troops in Japan. There's still U.S. troops in Germany. I mean
South
and the
Korea,
Europe,
Philippines, yeah,
South
all of them.
Korea,
You're right. You're
and
right.
and the European leaders, they just can't grow a spine. And I mean, like the latest term is actually really weird because now like the whole Ukraine war, the
Yeah.
Ukraine conflict was mainly fueled by United States. But now Trump is saying, okay, I'm washing my hands of this. And the European leaders, they're now saying they're going to go along without United States to support
Uh,
Ukraine. This is
they
crazy. Like
can't.
this,
They can't.
because they're just saying that to save their own face because they stake their own political career in
Yeah.
supporting the U.S. project. And now they feel like, oh, they can't do the 180 like the way Trump is doing. So now you have Canada saying they're going to form a partnership with Europe, not with the United States, but with you. This is crazy talk. We know that's crazy. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. And at the same time, they're still like trying to go, follow the U.S. lines on toe the U.S. lines on China. Like Europe.
Yeah.
So far, it's a world apart from China. Europe faced no security threat from China whatsoever ever. Yet they're still talking about how they're gonna get involved in South China Sea and this
It's
is
ridiculous.
I mean this is I mean Europeans. I feel
Mm.
sorry for the European people. They deserve better leaders. Their
Yeah.
leadership have failed them, and all their leaders are basically have been groomed from a very young age in different Atlantis institutions to be the pliant spokesperson for United States. And even now they're with the change regime change in US, they still can't change their tunes. They're still sprouting the same old neoliberal lines, which we know is doomed to fail.
It's not gonna go. No. Now, speaking, you mentioned earlier about the just on this note, guys. I want to send you a link here regarding, and I read this article. It was incredible about how the Chinese market. Just to follow up on what Carl said, how the Chinese market now is set to outperform Wall Street. As U.S. so-called exceptionalism comes to oppose. That's what I found very, very interesting. As a matter of fact, I'm going to share a quote if you allow me, guys. Here is what it says. Quote, U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs policy has fanned speculations of an economic slowdown in the world's largest economy. Meanwhile, in China, optimism around the country's artificial intelligence capabilities has intensified since the introduction of DeepSeek R1 model earlier this year. The US has had a good period, and that's coming to an end because Trump's policies are very anti-economy. China has had a very bad period, but it looks as if it's starting to recover. End of quote. This one's coming from Richard Harris, the CEO of Port Shelter. So I'm gonna, guys, send you this link here. Then we'll move on into our second part of the conversation. To those who's just joining us here, you are watching my conversation with my friend Carl Zha. Okay, where is this? Let me remove this picture here, and here we are. So, all right, Carl, I want to move into. Yeah, go ahead, Carl. You want to say something?
Oh yeah, about
Yeah, go ahead.
the market. I mean, one of the reason is the U.S. stocks has been going up like in a straight line. As a result of the U.S. government money printing for a while now, and the smart money is now trying to take some of their winnings off the table. This is why you saw last week more than $1 trillion have been wiped out from the U.S. stock market. They are, those money are not gone. They didn't evaporate into the thin air.
Yeah.
It's these big players, all these fund managers. They're now selling those U.S. stocks. They're moving the money elsewhere, and they move the money to places offshore, like in Europe, emerging market, and China. And the reason why they move their money to China is because the Chinese stock market has been actually depressed for a very long time. People have been expressing surprise how cheap Chinese stock is compared to the American stocks, because compared to the company earnings and revenue and the future outcast, a lot of the Chinese stock market has been depressed for so long. Now they look very cheap. And this is and now people are finally paying attention to see what BYD is doing. That's why, like, BYD, a lot of the Chinese EV makers like BYD, Geely, XPeng, their stock has been going up. And one reason is when people finally realize China, this transition, EV transition in China is secular. It's not a fad. And then they also realize, that's not only that's where the trend is, but in comparison, where U.S. market is in the bubble territory, the Chinese stock market is still cheap. This is why a lot of fund managers now they're shifting the funds from United States to China. I mean, it just makes sense from economic standpoint of view, because BYD, they just surpassed Tesla in revenue. I mean, that's pretty big. Tesla is kind of like the number one premier brand number one premier brand in EV for United States, and BYD just surpassed that. Whereas 10 years ago, Elon Musk was on CNBC laughing about.
I remember that. You're right, Carl.
He was like,
I remember him laughing.
He was like, "Oh, have you seen their cars? They make terrible cars. You better make sure they survive in China." Well, 10 years ago, he wasn't wrong. The thing is, he wasn't wrong, because I remember more than 10 years ago, there was a famous dating show in China called Face and Wuzao. I remember there was a scene where the female guest, so they have one guy, eligible bachelor, and he's all the women are paid, they rate him, to decide whether to date him or not. But like, I remember some of the women guests were making fun of guys who drive BYD, because back then BYD was making cheap, affordable cars, and and they weren't known exactly for the quality. So more than 10 years ago, even the Chinese consumers were laughing with Elon Musk. at BYD. But BYD, they really changed. I mean, this is why I have to give it to Warren Buffett, because even while those Elon Musk and all those Chinese game show, dating show contestants were laughing at BYD, Warren Buffett was already invested back then, particularly through his friend Charlie Munger. And then BYD really transformed in the last 10 years. They made the switch from being a major battery maker to making electric vehicles, and making electric vehicles that's stylish, that's fancy and affordable. And they're going after all ranges too. They're producing like cheap, affordable entry cars like Seagull, which is selling for like $11,000 in China. And then they also sell like Yangwang, which is like luxury SUVs loaded with features. I forgot what the price of Yangwang is. It's like $70,000 or something. So they now cover the whole range of the vehicle market, and they are expanding very rapidly to they're building factories in Europe. They're building a new factory in Indonesia. Now, the Chinese government recently vetoed their plan to expand into Mexico, because the Chinese government is worried that by building the BYD factory so close to the United States, you will make it easier for U.S. to steal intellectual property of BYD. How time have changed.
Indeed. Well, I remember when I was in China, I went to a BYD dealership, and they allowed me inside, and the manager was kind. He allowed me to do recording. I did a recording for the community there and so forth. And I did ask about one particular vehicle there, and it was like, he told me this is the high end. And I said, what are we looking at cost-wise here? Well, he said, give or take, about 24 to 26,000. Which to me was like, okay, if this is higher end, that's affordable by everybody. I said, what's unique about this? He said to me that this car can become self-driving if you need it to be. And when I sat inside, it was incredible for how the whistles and everything on it. So you're absolutely correct as far as the luxury cars for BYD has now. This is why the government here is not allowing that, because most Americans will end up buying that Chinese car. Here, so.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, like BYD just announced they're going to have LiDARs in all their cars, from their cheapest model to the high end. The LiDAR they use lasers as sensors. Wow. So again, this is for self-driving purposes. So the cars will be more self-aware of its surroundings. Even in like incremental weathers and stuff. I mean, this is like, you only get those features if you buy like really expensive cars in the United States. But the Chinese consumers are really spoiled right now. They're getting all these features in very cheap, affordable cars. And they're like there's a lot of new cars coming out, new models also hitting the market. That's at like, in China they sell for $11,000. But like when they export market to like Australia, for example, it's often double in price, but it's still like $20,000, still very affordable. So I mean, this is why U.S. government would never want to see Chinese EV hitting their shores, because everyone would just rush by them to buy them. I mean, no doubt.
For sure. This leads me to our key topic we're going to be addressing here, Carl. And this one has to do with when we think in terms of Southeast Asia, in general term, Southeast Asia. And in my opinion, Southeast Asia, of course, you know this one, and I'm sure many agree, that it has some enormous strategic values if we are to think in terms of the Chinese automobile as an example. So in your opinion, do you think that the U.S. is trying to create a wedge between between China and ASEAN or ASEAN countries?
Oh, for sure. When ASEAN was first formed, this was actually U.S. actually really pushing for this idea. When it was first formed, it was formed as like kind of the counter to China. So
Mm-hmm.
U.S. idea is get all these Southeast Asian countries together, then they can form a to resist China. But that didn't really pan out. ASEAN really became a economic regional forum for all the Southeast Asian countries. For example, there's reduced tariffs. So like
Mm-hmm.
the cars made in Thailand, they don't have to pay as much tariff if they want to sell in Indonesia, and people who can travel freely between ASEAN countries. Like my wife, she's an Indonesian citizen. She can go to Vietnam, Thailand. Don't have to worry about getting visa, etc. So I'm very bullish on Southeast Asia because
Yeah.
with the gravitational pull of the Chinese economy, the tide lift all boats. Well, okay, maybe with the exception of Philippines until they sort out of their political issues internally, but the rest of ASEAN, even country like Myanmar, which is still in deep political crisis right now, I think
Yeah.
in the long term will be fine just by their physical proximity to China, because one thing that U.S. has been really driving hard for is the decoupling from China. It's forcing the companies to move their supply chain away from China, and this accelerated a trend of like labor intensive industries leaving China to Southeast Asia. Now that trend was already started before U.S. policy, because the wage are rising in China for the last 30 years. It's steadily climbing. So a lot of the low margin,
Mm-hmm.
like labor intensive stuff like textile, were already leaving China to places like Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia, etc. But the recent U.S. push is pushing more company to go to these places, but it's not working as U.S. intended again, because
Yeah.
for example, a lot of companies chose Vietnam for because Vietnam is physically connected to China, because Vietnam has real links with China. Vietnam has ports that's close to China, so Vietnam can be seamlessly linked with the Chinese supply chain. So what really happened is that they're expanding the Chinese supply chain to the rest of Southeast Asia, and the whole region economically is getting integrated. And this applies to not
Mm-hmm.
more than just Vietnam, but also Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand, and when the U.S., for example, they're trying to build data centers in places like Malaysia, right? Because they wanted to have to power the whole AI infrastructure. Well, guess what? Those data centers, they can also work with China. All these semiconductors that's been manufactured in Malaysia, they can also supply Chinese market. Because in fact, that's China is the closest, largest market there is. So what end up happening is there's a manufacturing boom in Southeast Asia right now. A lot of that is coming from the flow out of China, and that flow is both capital and skill, because China, a lot of Chinese companies, when they open factories in Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
and Indonesia, they're also doing technological transfer. So and now there's much more tighter economic integration in the region. Like a lot of the youngins in Indonesia now, they're learning Chinese. Like this is a country that used to ban Chinese education during
Yeah.
Suharto's reign. Until 1998, Chinese education was banned, but now the youngins, a lot of the younger Chinese Indonesians that I have met, they're all learning Chinese right now. They're all trying to pick up Chinese to leverage this amazing opportunity. And this is we have yeah, I'm really really bullish on Southeast Asia right now, and China is I'm going back to EVs because this is what I I'm in the market to look for a new car, and I have visited the dealership of BYD on Bali, and their staffs are very helpful, and what I realized is I just need to wait one more year. Then the factories, the BYD factory in Indonesia will open at the end of the year, and the prices will
The
have
price.
probably come down because more Chinese companies are coming to Indonesia. Like before it was just Wuling and then Chery, BYD. Now Geely is coming to Indonesia. Xpeng is coming to Indonesia. Like the Deepal is coming to Indonesia. Like I'm like, okay, I just need to wait one more year. All these Chinese models were gonna land in Indonesia, and many of them are going to be manufactured in Indonesia. BYD is already constructing their factory. Geely currently they ship their kit, their car kits to Indonesia and have a local partner to assemble them in Indonesia. But they will probably also looking into do more in how like manufacturing of car parts in Indonesia, because that like I say, Indonesia do have tariffs to encourage domestic manufacturing, and this is and China are looking to invest, and this is the difference between U.S. tariff and Indonesian tariff, by the way. So Indonesian tariff is to encourage the foreign companies. In the past was Japanese and Korean, now Chinese companies, car companies, to make their cars in Indonesia. In United States, which Chinese company is crazy enough to invest in the United States right now in this current political climate? When just next month in April is going to be the deadline for TikTok's for sale date. If TikTok don't sell to an American-owned company, TikTok will have to close in the United States. I mean, with this in mind, which Chinese company is crazy enough to put their money in US? It can be taken away at any point. If you're successful, they're going to try to force you to sell it. So this is and to put a factory down is a big investment. It's a long-term investment. Factory takes 3 to 4 years to get it up and running and turn a profit. And by then you're gonna have a different president in the United States, and policy can change.
For sure.
I mean, the one thing business really hate is uncertainty, and this is another reason there's a huge decline in the U.S. stock market, because the Trump tariff is creating a lot of uncertainty in U.S. right now. People don't know how he's going to implement these tariffs, whether he is even going to implement this tariff. But business hate uncertainty. This is why people are taking their money off the table just to see where the dust settles. And this is where China, they have been very consistent. They this is, people don't people say, oh, China is authoritarian, whatever. But China has provided a stable political environment for last 40 years. That's why all these foreign money are willing to come in and put down foreign direct investment. That's why Tesla is building their gigafactory in Shanghai, because they know, the Chinese government is not going to try to take them away. It's and they know that in 4 or 5 years, their factories in China will probably be okay. Right now, a lot of other foreign automakers are losing out in China. It's not because what Chinese government did, is because they themselves did not, deploy all their billions of earnings in China into research and development, into the EV transition, which Chinese government had been pushing for a long time. And so they kind of just got complacent and just, because they were making money head over heels in China, and they kind of just missed the boat of the electric transition. And so this is on them. But anyone a lot of people who run business, they will tell you it's easier to open a business in China, to open and operate a business in China, than it is in the United States, because they encounter less regulations in China operating a business than they would have in the United States, and that says a lot.
Well, for sure. And now, speaking of your vehicle, so now if you wait till the end of the year, car, you're gonna have choices. So, and you are absolutely correct about the prices going down. So you will have basically you choose. Yeah, it's a buyer's market. It's gonna be a buyer's market. So
Whereas in United States, end of the year,
no,
the price is going to go up. The new
it's the
car price is going to
reverse.
go up.
No, it's the reverse in the US. And the prices, I argued this literally when I saw the prices of BYD in China, and I asked, and I was like, I remember I called here to ask one particular question, and I was told, no. If you bring a Chinese car, you're gonna have to pay 100% tariffs on it. I was like, what? That means that the vehicle is gonna end up costing me twice. What's the point? It's because they wanted to prevent that from happening, from having, because it's cheap and they don't want people to know about this one. I bet you, Carl, if the Chinese vehicles are here, no one will purchase American models.
Yeah.
I bet you that.
Yeah.
I bet you that. So to go back to our point about ASEAN, because I want to really focus on this, given that Philippines is part of the ASEAN. Do you see the Philippines as the weak link, given what's going on, and could create that opportunity for the U.S.?
Well, I mean, that's why U.S. is, really placing all its bets on the Philippines right now.
Philippines.
Philippines is really, like I say, it's U.S.'s linchpin strategy to stir up tensions in South China Sea. The official position on ASEAN on South China Sea is actually let's put aside our dispute, our disagreement, and do joint exploration so we can all profit. Right? There's a understanding among ASEAN to kind of table the dispute, but Philippines, because they just decide to be the pawn in U.S. grand chessboard against China, and that's not good for the Philippines. Like the Philippines they're getting economically left behind. When Philippines have so much going for it. It has a lot of people. It has 100 million people, one of the largest, most populous country in the ASEAN, but they haven't really caught up in terms of climbing the economic ladder. Like Vietnam just surpassed Philippines in terms of GDP per capita. This is Vietnam. Vietnam experienced a brutal war for many years and recovered from that. And Philippines, was at peace since World War II. And the Philippines has a large pool of like well-educated English-speaking labor force. Yet, its infrastructure left a lot to be desired. I can say this because I used to fly out of Manila airport during my transit. Because Manila, Philippines also strategically located. It can't be a regional hub. That's why a lot of airlines do use Manila airport as its hub. But the problem, the transit, the flight. Anytime I have to do a transit in Manila, it's such a headache because the way the airport is designed, I was flying from Bali to Japan. I have to make a stopover in Manila. So they make me get off the plane, and then in order to go to another terminal to catch my flight to Japan, I have to go through 5 security checks. 5 security. I didn't even. I just got off a plane. How I'm carrying a bomb or dangerous material, and it doesn't make sense. And I realized why is because the way they designed the airport, they don't have like in many airports, when you make transit flight, you are kind of stay in the terminal area. You are not going out, right? So you are already in the area that people can only access to if they go through security. So that's why you can just go from one terminal to another terminal, catch your flight. But in the Philippines, for the Manila airport, for some weird reason, right, they have these terminals that's like open, anybody can go into. But so what they do is they put security checkpoint at every terminal. So this is create a huge pain. I just got off the plane, and to catch another plane, I had to go through 5 security checkpoints. It's a really pain in the butt. And like I wish I think Philippines is in due for major infrastructure update. That's just my experience. And look at Indonesia, right? Indonesia now they have high speed rail. They're going 350 kilometers per hour. They're even ahead of United States in that regard, and this is because they work with China. But overall, I think my take on ASEAN is that the whole region is going up and up trajectory because they're in the neighborhood of China, and China will do its best not to take the bait by United States, because China also don't want to start a war in its own neighborhood, because if a war happens in around Chinese coast, it's going to be the Chinese cities and its neighbors going to be devastated. This is a whole U.S. plan. They plan to have a war, but in other countries, and this is why most of the ASEAN countries don't even want to get involved. They don't want to have to choose between United States and China, which is what U.S. is making people do. Either us or the highway. You're either with us or against us. But China is not forcing anybody to choose. China is just like, hey, let's just sit down and do business. Let's work out an area of common interest where both of us can profit. And this I don't know if this is on your agenda to talk about. There's an interesting development. India now is singing a different tune. Many people have been saying India is the weakest link in the BRICS, right? And because India was part of the Quad, which is specifically designed to contain China, and US have didn't shy away of talking about weaponizing India against China. But recently, Modi, and now the Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar has been making very conciliatory speeches about China. Jaishankar just said, India and China will have some differences. Some differences will persist, but it's more important that we work together. There's more benefit of both of us working together. And this is what Modi also said, which is a big shift in tone. And I think one part is because the United States have been really going hard on India in the last couple of years, right? There's a whole the blow up between India and Canada when Canada and U.S. intelligence service blame India for sending assassins to assassinate Canadian citizens, assassinate U.S. citizens, and then basically U.S. also brought a lot of pressure on India for India continue to have a trade relationship with Russia during the Ukraine conflict, and they have repeatedly hammered India on that issue of purchasing Russian oil. And I think that now India is like, okay, well, I don't want to be your frontline soldier against China anymore. It's like there's no, I don't see much profit in this for me. So they're now making conciliatory speeches toward China. And one big major development is they are now talking to reopen the BYD deal in India, because BYD originally planned to open a factory in India, but that plan got scuttled. Now it looks like that discussion is back. Now BYD is now, because for a long time India was banning Chinese investment, into their economy because they're worried about the Chinese takeover, blah blah blah. But now they're restarting the BYD India talks. So now maybe India saw what's happening in ASEAN next door, and they thought, okay, well maybe we can work with that. So this is pretty big, because India is huge. India is the most populous country in the world now. Their population even surpassed China, and India is a big market, and a
Yeah.
lot of the Chinese companies they have been trying to invest in India, but they were being prevented by Indian government regulations to protect some of the Indian business monopoly, like Modi's buddy, the Ambani
Yeah.
family's
Donnie. Yes.
monopoly. Oh, yeah.
Which, by the way, he was put under the microscope here in Washington for investigation. That
yes,
tells you the
this is
story
why.
right there. Yeah.
Yeah, this is why I think India now is trying to move closer to China. So
Mm.
this is going to be very interesting to watch how that will play out. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure there's still a lot of mutual distrust, but China never tried to make India enemy, because like China's priority is always try to push United States out of East Asia.
Yeah.
Like India is not China's like it's not a priority for China to antagonize India, right? And so this is the two sides do have some common interest to work from if India wants to ease the tension, because that's what China wants too. So that will be a major development, like, because even Mearsheimer sometimes talk about, oh, like India and China, that could be a potential flashpoint. And I'm like, dude, I respect you, Professor Mearsheimer, but I don't think that's going to be possible, because there's a whole Himalayan, a huge mountain range in between the two nations. I mean, there's not going to be like a huge war breaking out when both sides, they have these protocols of not using guns, not using firearms in the border conflict. So both sides have tried to contain their border dispute. So I think will be very interesting to watch where the India-China relationship go from here in next year or two.
Yeah. But it will be interesting. Consider also there were the two other issues. One of them has to do with the 5G, and second one has to do with the electric bus that the Chinese end up withdrawing because the Indians didn't. They were supposed to pay 50% upfront, something into that effect. The one I was very familiar with has to do with the 5G, because to the last minute, the Indian government was pressured to reject the 5G from the Chinese to the last minute. So it makes you just wonder.
This is something that Washington works really hard to make sure the Chinese 5G do not become standard, because they don't have a the Five Eye intelligence network, they don't have a back door to Huawei. That's a real problem, because they were blind if this is why they were really against Huawei gaining the 5G contract in UK, in Germany. How else because they're going to tap the phone of Angela Merkel, right? if they don't have back door to the telecom network. But this is what I see happening, David, is I see United States is right now trying to build a wall all around it and some of its allies. But now that alliance is kind of wobbly because of Trump. But at least try to build a wall around United States. While China and the rest of the world, they're going to continue to trade with each other. They're going to continue to power ahead technologically, economically, and I was, on the other hand, I foresee more stagnation in the West.
Well, there is one thing I want to say on a record, Carl, is I don't trust the Indian government. I'll say it on record. I have nothing against the Indian people. That's one thing, is the government, because I worked in Washington. I was aware of certain backdoor dealings that India was involved in, and even now, recently, the deal that the India has signed with the U.S. Navy for the ports, that they will allow. This saying is only for refueling. No. It's more than that. It's because if there is a conflict in South China Sea, India is going to be dragged into this one way or another. That's why I don't trust them. No matter what the foreign minister or even Modi is saying, they just play in both sides, but it's going to have to come to an end. Let me just say thank you here to Tamputra. Thank you very much for your super sticker. Sending my prayer and condolences to everyone in Myanmar and Thailand. Yeah, this has to do with the earthquake, guys. I don't know if you heard about it or not. It was or it was on a 7.7 Richter scale, which was devastating, very, very devastating. So
I will be in Bangkok actually next month, in early next month, so I can give my report
yeah, that
from
will be
there.
great, Carl. I will touch base with you on that. I am aware that Hanging G was an avid supporter of the channel. He told me that now the Chinese going to be sending their own response teams to Thailand. So that includes also Russia and India. But again, the Chinese have more knowledge regarding the infrastructure, regarding the cranes, regarding the tractors, and all that stuff that's going to be working 24 hours to fix the problem. So I wish. It's sad. It's sad what happened. So
yeah,
I want to.
the epicenter is in Mandalay, is inside Myanmar.
Yeah.
Mandalay is one of the historical capital of ancient Myanmar, and that a lot of historical site has been damaged. And Mandalay was also, like, I think the second or the third largest city in Myanmar.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, I'm sure, were affected. Yeah.
I wanted to address one last thing before I let you go, Carl, because I like to hear your assessments on what's going on in West Asia or Middle East, especially with the U.S. and Iran and the U.S. and the Houthis. But we're going to focus on one aspect, and this one has to do. Let me share, guys, the screen with you so you can see what I'm referring to here. And this, I got it on my tweet, on my Twitter feed, rather, by the Asian commentator who follows me on the Twitter. Very interesting aspects into this. If you look at this one here, Carl, would you be in with those who are saying there are two schools of thought, but we're going to focus on one that says Iran should invite China to build a military base near the Strait of Hormuz. It is important to China. Why is this? Because China needs to begin using its military to protect its trade routes. Will that be a fair assessment, in your opinion?
Well, that will be a huge tectonic geopolitical shift. I mean, because currently U.S. Navy is kind of like pride on itself on kind of the big dog in the Persian Gulf, right? I mean, but not really, because we know, because of physical proximity of Iran to the Strait of Hormuz, we all know U.S. real hot kinetic situation, there's not much U.S. can do, because Iran can just launch land-based missiles, and they can easily close the Strait of Hormuz. And that's an interesting. I don't know what China's intentions are, because one of the value, quote unquote value, the U.S. provides is as a security guarantor in the Gulf region, is particular to all the Gulf monarchies, right? I've talked about Saudi, UAE, Qatar, etc., and Bahrain, and to make sure, like, U.S. is like, okay, we're here to protect you against Iran. We're here to make sure your government stays in place. You don't fall from, like, a popular revolt, and this is a value proposition brought by U.S. Navy. Now, I don't know if it will happen, but if China have a naval presence in Persian Gulf. And when China is friendly with all these countries, China is friendly with both Saudi Arabia and Iran. It kind of makes the U.S. military presence redundant, and that's what I mean by a strategic tectonic shift, because already economically, the Gulf region is already tied to China. Majority of their export is to China, not to United States. U.S. nowadays actually import very little oil from the Gulf. The U.S., whereas China is a big customer both for Iranian oil and the oil and gas from Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc. So if China somehow steps up as a security guarantor of the region, then basically there's no reason for U.S. Navy to be there anymore. So I'm pretty sure U.S. will do its utmost to prevent that from happening. Because that means U.S. will lose the Middle East. I mean, the only outpost that we'll have now will be just Israel. where right now they have their base in
Qatar.
Qatar.
Yes.
Yeah, and so if China moves in, then it's U.S. I don't think U.S. is ready to give up that role. So this is why I'm not sure China is ready to kind of have an open confrontation with United States in the Persian Gulf region, because that would be an open confrontation. I don't think U.S. will willingly be pushed out of the
Yeah.
Gulf, and they'll fight for it. So I don't know if China is at this point is ready to to take that challenge head on. But it is a very interesting proposal because, like I say, you would make the whole U.S. military presence over there
Yeah.
completely redundant. And then China, the added benefit for China is it doesn't have to worry about U.S. choking off Chinese oil supply. Even if not even if just U.S. causing a conflict with Iran, that could potentially shut down the Strait of Hormuz, right? But you just remove the U.S. factor, the region will be much more peaceful, right? And that itself will ensure the oil and gas will flow. So I don't see this happening anytime soon, just because I think China still needs time to build its projection capability. They do have a base in Djibouti, but so far Djibouti is just a logistic supply base for the Chinese Navy's anti-pirate operations around the Red Sea, and they don't have China don't have any kind of, and also it's not just China, it's also Iran. Iran will have to be willing to host a foreign military base on its soil, and Iran is very protective of its sovereignty, right? I mean,
That's true.
The issue also came up when when there was talk of maybe Russia have an air base in Iran. This was also one of the point that came up, because Iran is very protective of its sovereignty. So it might not be comfortable to have a foreign base on its soil. And then there's the issue of China's willingness to take on this power projection responsibility all the way to the Gulf. I think it's a little bit too early, personally. I think China right now, the strategic focus of China is still Southeast Asia. Like right now, Southeast China's strategic focus for the last, as long as we can remember, since 1949, has been trying to push U.S. military presence out of East Asia, and so that will remain the number one priority. Whether China is willing to take on another additional responsibility, that's remain to be seen.
Yeah. Well, I have to concur with you on that. I don't see the Chinese doing that. Where the advantage will be, and by the way, I was in Djibouti. I was at that port, and I saw the Chinese when I was still in Washington. I had some business to do there, but I saw the Chinese, and you're absolutely correct. It's for logistical purposes only. There is also Japanese presence in that base, the Djibouti one. So for us was a military presence. We had all the hardware and so forth. Now, in the case of China, hypothetically, this moves forward. I am wondering if China will deploy its really recent, for example, its recent new submarine. I have a picture here. This is the recent one. It's a very state of the art. I read the specs of it. Very, very, very interesting. So if China were to go, this is a submarine also belongs to China. If they are to go, which like I concur with you on that assessment, Carl, I don't see them doing that one because it'll change the dynamics, the geopolitical landscape, and the security architecture in the region. So I just don't see that one happening. So, well, Carl, my friend, I can't thank you enough. I want to give you the last word before I let you go. Just basically with where the Philippines turmoil, with now what's going on in Southeast Asia, especially with ASEAN countries moving forward towards economic prosperity, with the Thailand and China ventures, with the Vietnam and China ventures, and so where do you see all this is going?
Well, I see a greater prosperity for Southeast Asia and China. I mean, China's trajectory is still going up and up, and I think that will be the same for Southeast Asia. I'm looking forward to the new rail link upgrade between China and Vietnam, because their old their current rail link is like more than 100-year old. It was built by the
Yeah.
French colonial authority back in the 1900s to get to export opium, right, back then.
Yeah.
And so and it's a narrow gauge rail that going through very mountainous terrain. So China now is going to be contracted to build a new rail link that's using standard gauge, which is the same gauge as the most of the Chinese railroads, so they don't have to change tracks when they go across the border. And you will link with the Chinese neighboring provinces, and this will further the economic integration with China and Vietnam, because now all the Chinese goods, Chinese parts, can just get on the rail and ship to Hanoi, and all the factory around Hanoi, and where they go be assembled, the manufactured goods can get loaded on rail to ship to Haiphong, the ports, and then export it from there. So this just integrate Vietnam more tightly into the Chinese supply chain. So essentially, Chinese supply chain just expanded to include the rest of Southeast Asia. And I already mentioned, BYD. BYD opened a factory in Thailand, and that's already shaking up the market, because Southeast Asia traditionally is a stronghold of Japanese automakers. Southeast Asia actually has a big car market that people don't realize, and Japanese car makers traditionally have a very strong presence here.
Yeah.
You go to Southeast Asia, you see mostly Japanese cars, very few American cars, and you see some German cars, but mostly Japanese. But recently, like I mentioned earlier, Japanese car makers are in trouble. They are already losing their market in China, but now they're losing their market in Southeast Asia. Because China is bringing affordable electric cars to the mass market. And this is why Nissan, Mitsubishi, Honda, they're all in trouble. The talk of merger kind of fall apart, but still, those car makers are still gonna. I think one way it'd be interesting if some of them might be acquired by a Chinese automaker. Maybe Geely could acquire Nissan. That might happen. It sounds crazy, but things have happened, because the only Japanese automaker that's still holding their own market share is Toyota. And the other ones, Nissan, Mitsubishi, Honda, they're on their last legs right now in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. They're gonna get a hit by another double whammy by the Trump tariff in the United States, and
before he leaves office.
yeah. So I mean, they are. It'll be very tough for them, for the Japanese car makers, other than Toyota, to survive the next 4 years. So let's see how that shake out. But the Chinese are rapidly gaining market share now. Now you can get BYD even in the Philippines. Even with you can get the BYD Seagull in the Philippines. I think it's selling a little bit more than what they sell in China. In China, they sold for $11,000, but I think maybe in the Philippines, I'm not sure. I mean, I think in rest of Southeast Asia, it might sell for like $18,000 or something, but it's still very affordable. I'm still waiting for them to bring those models to Indonesia, to open their factories in Indonesia, so I can partake of that, be part of the buyer's market.
You're right.
Now, like you say, so it's a buyer's market. I just need to be a little bit patient. There's more Chinese models entering the market. There's more competition. That means they're going to have to
Yeah.
drop the prices. I mean, this is what happened to Tesla. Tesla had to drop their prices in China because the competition from Chinese automakers like BYD, and it's great for consumers, but I feel sorry for my fellow Americans back home because you are gonna hit with a price hike you have never seen
That's
very
true.
soon. Yeah,
That is true. Well, for you, Carl, you only have almost another 6 months for the end of the year, or 7 months, whatever that is. The end of the year will be here soon, so I am sure you will get a better deal. There is no doubt about it. So let me say thank you quickly here before I'll post for you guys a link to Carl YouTube channel here. Global Prosperity. Thank you so much for your super sticker. I like your statement there. So E 82, thank you very much for your super sticker. Appreciate you for that. Bola Tinubu, I'm very familiar with Tinubu. So yeah, that guy is the backdoor for the US government, so we put him there. I remember back in the day. So once again, appreciate your support for the channel. Now for you guys, if you want to take a look at which I highly recommend, this is Carl Zha, a link to his YouTube. If you want to learn, remember what I talked to you about today. Have a creative mind, and creative mind will always push you towards learning. So if you want to learn about history, here is a channel for you. That's Carl's channel. You will learn a lot from it. You will, your time will be well spent. So make sure to subscribe to Carl Zha's channel there. I also follow him on Twitter. It is his Twitter handler there. Make sure to subscribe there. He posts a lot of very informative information there. So, well, Carl, my friend, I can't thank you enough. I wish you a safe travel to Bangkok, and look forward to talking with you by the time you get back home after your trip, and we go from there. You take care, Carl.
thanks, David.
My pleasure. Guys, for you guys, I hope you enjoyed listening to Carl. As always, he is very wealth of information, and it's worth the time. That's why I can't wait for the end of the month, because usually he was gracious enough to allocate time for us here, so to just share with you the information. Remember to join me tomorrow at 08:30 a.m. for my conversation with Professor Anna Malandag. So I look forward to seeing you there. As always, remember, geopolitics impact your daily life in more ways than one. Till next time, guys. Bye-bye.